In the heart of the cracked and thirsty plains lay the village of Nambila, once a land of lush fields and singing rivers, now a place where dust ruled like a cruel king. The sun burned mercilessly, peeling the color from the world, and every day began with the same hollow prayer for rain that never came. Children woke with dry tongues, women walked miles to fetch muddy water, and even the trees seemed to bow in defeat. The air was thick with despair, yet heavier still was the silence of the skies, a silence that carried memory and warning. The elders gathered beneath the old baobab tree each morning, their wrinkled faces marked by worry and wisdom. They spoke of days when thunder would roll across the valley like a drumbeat of promise, when rain danced upon the roofs and lightning kissed the soil with renewal. But those days had vanished with the spirit of the storm, the guardian they called Xiri, whose roar once kept balance between sky and earth. The thunder sleeps, they said, because the people have forgotten how to listen. It was not just the land that was dry. The hearts of Nambila had grown brittle with selfishness, envy, and forgotten reverence. The chief, desperate to preserve his power, offered hollow sacrifices, grains that were already rotten, and chants that held no spirit. His wife, Lelo, adorned herself with gold while her people starved, whispering that rain would come only to those who obeyed her. The villagers' hope began to shift toward fear, their faith cracking under the heat. The youngest among them no longer knew the sound of thunder. They thought it was a myth told by trembling voices at dusk. And in the midst of this desolation lived a young girl whose presence defied the silence. Her name was Nyasha, a quiet, observant child who spent her days near the old well humming to the wind. Her songs carried something strange and soft, something that made the dust swirl and the leaves tremble faintly, as if the world itself paused to listen. But few noticed her gentle voice amidst the drought's tyranny. Life had become survival, and survival left no room for wonder. The elders warned that a drought this long was not born of nature but of neglect. The spirit of thunder had not abandoned them without reason. Somewhere between greed and silence, Nambila had broken its covenant with the sky. At night, as stars blinked like fading embers, Nyasha would stare upward and whisper, "When will you come back?" Her small hands would rise as if reaching for clouds that no longer lived there. The wind sometimes answered in faint murmurs, carrying whispers of an ancient name, Xiri, across the sleeping huts. But the next morning always brought the same endless dryness, and each sunrise deepened the belief that the heavens had turned away for good. And yet, deep beneath that silence, something stirred. The air was changing, ever so slightly as if holding its breath. The forgotten spirit of the storm had begun to listen again, drawn by a voice pure enough to awaken memory. The village of Nambila did not know it yet, but its fate would soon hinge upon that small, silent song. Lindai rose before the sun each morning, long before the roosters crowed or the village began to stir. The world at that hour was suspended between night and day, soft, blue and waiting. She would walk barefoot through the brittle grass, her feet tracing the same narrow path that led to the dying river. Once, this river had danced with silver fish and laughter. Now it slithered weakly through cracked mud, whispering like a ghost of what it used to be. But Lindai came not for water, she came to sing. Her voice, delicate and haunting, wove through the air like the first thread of rain. The villagers often said her singing carried the kind of sadness that could make even the stones weep. When she sang, the wind shifted direction, the air thickened, and the birds paused mid-flight as though listening. Her melodies were older than the village itself, songs passed down through generations of women who understood that music could touch what words could not. It was her late mother, Mama Nuru, who had taught her those sacred songs, the ones meant to speak to the spirits of the sky. Lindai still remembered her mother's final evening, the way the storm clouds gathered in the distance, the way the air hummed with tension and grief. Mama Nuru had sat by her side, braiding her daughter's hair and whispering softly, "Never stop singing to the thunder, my child. It listens only to the heart that believes." That night, her mother's voice faded into the rhythm of the rain, and by morning the storm had passed, taking her mother with it. Since then, Lindai had carried that melody in her heart, believing that if she sang long enough, the heavens might one day listen again. The villagers called her the river's daughter, and treated her songs with a mixture of reverence and fear. Some said her music kept the storms away, others whispered that she angered the thunder by daring to call it by name. But Lindai didn't sing for praise or superstition, she sang because silence hurt too much. Every note she released was a prayer stitched with love, longing, and the ache of a girl who had lost too much too soon. As she sang, ripples formed across the still surface of the river. Her reflection shimmered, a girl of 19, slender, barefoot, her dark skin glistening with dawn light. Around her neck hung a simple pendant carved from bone, a keepsake from her mother. Sometimes, when the wind brushed her cheek just so, she imagined it was her mother's hand, gentle and guiding. When she returned to the village each morning, the elders watched her with guarded eyes. "That child sings too often to the spirits," they would murmur. "She calls things that should remain sleeping." But the children adored her. They followed her to the edge of the village, clapping their hands to her tunes, laughing even as the earth cracked beneath them. To them, Lindai was hope made flesh, a reminder that beauty could exist even in drought. Yet beneath her calm smile lay exhaustion. Her songs had become heavier, carrying not only hope but also despair. Each dawn without rain felt like a betrayal, as though the sky itself mocked her devotion. She began to wonder if the spirits had turned deaf, if her mother's promise was nothing but an old story told to comfort the dying. Still, she sang because that was all she knew. And on one particular morning, as the horizon blushed with the first light of day, her voice trembled with something new, a subtle power, a resonance that made the earth beneath her hum. The wind shifted, carrying her song far across the plains. The river shimmered faintly as if remembering its former glory. Somewhere in the distance, a low rumble echoed. It was faint, fleeting, but it was thunder. When the rain still refused to come and the ground split into jagged veins of thirst, Lindai's father made a decision born of weariness. His name was Mosi, once strong and joyful, but the drought had hollowed him like a tree eaten from the inside. He believed that loneliness was another kind of famine, and so, when Mama Zira arrived from the neighboring village with her smooth words and promises of comfort, he welcomed her into his home. At first, Lindai tried to be hopeful. She wanted to believe that a woman's presence might bring warmth back to their crumbling household. But Mama Zira's beauty carried sharpness. Eyes like polished obsidian, voice as soft as honey but edged with iron. The villagers said she was clever and practical, a woman who could tame storms with a single glance. Yet when she looked at Lindai, her gaze was not of affection but of quiet assessment, the kind given to a rival, not a daughter. From the first morning, tension hung between them like a storm waiting to break. Lindai rose early as always to walk to the river and sing her mother's song. But when she returned, humming under her breath, she found Mama Zira standing by the doorway, arms crossed. "Child," she said in a voice too calm to be kind, "you must stop that noise. It brings no rain, only misfortune. The spirits do not like being disturbed." Lindai froze. "It's not noise, Mama. It's disrespect," Mama Zira interrupted sharply. "Do you think your songs are greater than the prayers of the elders? The gods are angry and every time you sing, the sky grows darker." Her father, weary from days of failed harvest and sleepless nights, said nothing. His silence was an agreement Lindai did not deserve. From that day her songs became forbidden in her own home. Mama Zira filled the air instead with her own rituals, burning strange herbs, whispering incantations and sprinkling ashes near the threshold. "To keep the thunder at bay," she said, though the villagers began to notice the sky growing heavier with each of her rituals. Still, people whispered about Lindai. When they saw her drawing water or tending the weak goats, they greeted her softly, their eyes full of pity and quiet admiration. "The river's daughter," they called her, "the girl who sings to the sky." Children would sneak to her window at dusk, begging for one more song before Mama Zira's watchful eyes found them. The stepmother hated it. Envy settled in her bones like dust. Every time she saw the villagers smile at Lindai, she felt her own authority slipping. "They love her voice more than my prayers," she muttered one night, pacing by the fire. "They believe she can bring rain. What if she takes my place even here?" Her resentment grew like a storm cloud. She began to twist her husband's heart with poison words. "Your daughter brings shame," she told him. "Every time she sings, the crops dry further. She mocks you before the ancestors. A father who cannot silence his daughter invites ruin." And so, Mosi, the man who once lifted Lindai onto his shoulders to watch lightning dance across the horizon, began avoiding her eyes. His silence wounded her more than any punishment could. Days turned to weeks. Lindai stopped singing aloud, but melody still hummed beneath her breath when she worked. The river seemed to hum back, faintly, like an echo refusing to die. One evening, as she washed her clothes at the riverbank, a small boy approached her, clutching a dry leaf in his hand. "My mother says you made thunder once," he whispered. "Can you do it again?" Lindai smiled sadly. "Thunder only listens when hearts are pure. And lately, hearts have been afraid." Behind her, hidden among the reeds, Mama Zira watched, her face lit by the fading sun, her eyes filled with venom. The next day she made her decree public. Standing before the gathered villagers, she spoke in a trembling voice designed to sound pious. The drought lingers because we have angered the sky. There is one among us whose voice calls storms but not rain, whose songs disturb the ancestors. From this day forth no one shall sing by the river. And the girl Lindau must be silent, lest the gods strike us all. The people murmured uneasily, torn between faith and fear. Lindau stood with her head bowed, feeling the weight of injustice pressing against her chest. She wanted to shout, to tell them the truth, that silence was the true curse, but her father's eyes begged her not to speak. That night the house was too quiet. Even the crickets refused to chirp. Lindau lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mother's song trapped inside her throat like a caged bird. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly on the horizon, distant, warning, patient. And Mama Zira, listening from the doorway, smiled to herself in the dark. The day Mama Zira sealed the gourd, silence fell upon Nambila like a shroud. The air, once trembling with Lindau's morning songs, turned heavy and lifeless. The riverbeds cracked deeper, the sky dulled into an endless gray, and the rhythm of thunder, the heartbeat of the land, stopped altogether. Lindau woke to find her throat dry, her voice gone. She tried to hum, to whisper, to cry, but only air escaped. Her father, once a proud and kind man, looked away in fear. He dared not question his new wife, who now wore charms of bone and ash around her neck and claimed that the gods had punished the girl for defying them. Mama Zira made Lindau her servant. From dawn until dusk she scrubbed floors, fetched water from the dry river's hollow, and ground grains that would barely feed them. When she tried to mouth her sorrow, Zira's eyes glowed like lightning about to strike. "You brought the curse upon us," she hissed. "If you ever try to sing again even without sound, I'll bury that empty throat myself." The villagers who once smiled at Lindau now avoided her. They believed what Zira whispered to them, that the girl's songs had angered the storm spirits and stolen the rain. Days turned into weeks and weeks into moons. The sun burned through the fields until the crops bowed down in surrender. Children coughed from dust instead of water. Animals lay dead by the dry wells, their bones bleached white like silent prayers. At night, Lindau would sit beneath the same sky she once sang to, clutching her throat, her heart crying louder than her lips could ever manage. She would look toward the horizon where the thunderclouds once gathered, but nothing stirred there anymore. The horizon had forgotten the color of rain. Inside Zira's hut, the gourd rested high on a wooden shelf, wrapped in layers of cloth drawn with storm symbols. Sometimes when the wind shifted, a faint hum could be heard inside it, soft, trapped, like a bird beating against its cage. Zira would quickly tighten the seals, muttering in the old tongue to keep the spirit inside. She told herself she had done it for power, but deep inside, jealousy had become her curse. The village began to fear her as much as they once feared the storms. One night, when the moon rose blood-red and the air felt too still, Lindau crept into the hut. Her bare feet made no sound on the earth floor. Her eyes glimmered with the faintest hope. She wanted only to touch the gourd, to feel her voice again. But as her fingers brushed the lid, a spark of blue light flashed, throwing her backward. The gourd trembled, and for a split second, a low rumble echoed from within, the sound of thunder remembering her name. Zira burst into the hut, her face twisted in fury, and struck Lindau to the ground. "You dare," she screamed. "You would call the storm back?" Lindau could not answer. Blood trickled from her lip, but her eyes spoke louder than any voice. They spoke of pain, loss, and something deeper, forgiveness. Zira's hand trembled. She could not bear that gaze and turned away. Outside, the wind moaned softly through the hollowed fields, as if carrying the ghost of Lindau's song. It touched every roof, every dying tree, and whispered of the wrong that had been done. By the next morning the silence felt alive. It pressed against every wall, every heart. The elders murmured that the land had fallen under a spell. The youngest children asked where the rain had gone, and their mothers had no answer. Lindau, voiceless and frail, continued her chores, her eyes always drifting to the sky. She did not know it yet, but deep within that silence, in the space where her song used to live, thunder was waiting. It was patient, ancient, and it had not forgotten her name. The heat came suddenly, fierce, relentless, and wrong. The sun no longer felt like the blessing of light. It was a punishment, hammering down on the village of Nambila without mercy. The air shimmered with it, and even the shadows trembled. Wells that still held a few drops of water turned to mud. Chickens lay limp in the dust, tongues dry. The elders sat outside their huts fanning themselves with palm leaves, muttering that the gods were angry, that something sacred had been broken. Mama Zira moved through the village like a storm cloud herself, dark, silent, carrying secrets. Sweat rolled down her back as she poured ashes at the four corners of her hut, whispering protection chants she barely remembered. She told the villagers the heat was a test, that they must not question the gods. But at night, when she lay awake, she could hear faint murmurs rising from the gourd, Lindau's voice or something older and angrier. The sound crawled through her dreams, half song, half thunder, echoing the words she had tried to bury. You cannot silence the sky. Lindau worked quietly through the heat, her skin blistered from the sun, her lips cracked and bleeding. Yet her eyes seemed to glow with a strange calmness, as if she could hear something no one else could. Sometimes she would stop mid-task, tilt her head to the windless air and smile faintly. When her stepmother caught her doing that, she struck her across the face. "What are you listening to, girl?" she spat. But Lindau only touched her throat and looked upward. That night the wind changed. It was sudden, a deep, sweeping breath that moved through the dead trees and sent shivers across the cracked earth. The villagers woke, startled. Children clung to their mothers. Dogs howled. Then came the light, a blinding streak of blue-white that split the darkness. Thunder followed, but it didn't roll across the sky like before. It spoke. The lightning struck the ground just outside Mama Zira's hut, and when the villagers rushed out, they found no fire, no destruction. Only the soil itself had been burned into a shape, not random, not natural. It was a word, drawn in scorched lines, "Return what you stole." Gasps spread through the crowd. The elders knelt, trembling, and whispered prayers. "It is a warning," one said. "The thunder spirits are awake." Another murmured, "The gods want what belongs to them." Zira stood frozen at her doorway, her mouth dry, her mind spinning. The gourd, she knew they meant the gourd. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "Lies?" she said aloud, though her voice cracked. "It's just the storm's madness." But deep down, fear rooted itself in her bones. That night, she tore through her hut, lifting mats, pushing aside baskets, and dug a hollow beneath the floor. There, she buried the gourd, wrapping it in new cloth, muttering curses to bind it again. The symbols she drew were crooked and rushed. She could feel her hands shaking too hard to form them right. When she was done, she sat in the darkness, panting. Outside, thunder murmured once more, softer now, almost like a sigh of disappointment. Lindau awoke from her sleep with tears on her cheeks. In her dream, she had stood upon the hill by the old baobab tree, and around her danced figures made of lightning, tall, glowing beings whose eyes shone like molten gold. They sang her name in deep, rumbling tones. "Lindau, child of rain, your song was not taken, it was imprisoned." One of them extended a hand of pure light toward her. "When the storm calls, answer. The sky remembers you." She reached out, but before she could touch the figure, the thunder cracked and she woke, heart pounding. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. The birds that had fled Nambila returned, but they did not sing. They cawed and screamed, circling the chief's compound as if warning of something unseen. The villagers' shadows grew faint under the unrelenting sun. Even the old drums, once used to call rain, split and warped from dryness. Yet at dusk, people began hearing faint notes of song near the dry river. Not words, not clear melody, but a haunting hum that rose with the night wind. Children said they saw flashes of blue light when they closed their eyes. The elders grew afraid to speak of it. "The thunder spirits walk again," they whispered. Someone angered them. Zira felt it too, a heaviness in the air that followed her like a curse. Every time she passed by the buried gourd, her ears rang with whispers, her heart thudded like drums. She would wake in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, hearing distant thunder even when the sky was clear. Sometimes she thought she saw Lindau standing by the river at dawn, her lips parted as if singing, though no sound came out. The sight filled her with rage and terror. "You won't take what's mine," she would mutter. "You won't undo what I've bound." But the spirits were patient. On the seventh night after the lightning's warning, a low rumble rolled across the horizon. Not enough to shake the ground, but enough to make every villager lift their heads. The wind carried the faintest smell of rain, clean, alive, teasing. Lindau stood outside her hut, her bare feet in the dust, eyes wide with hope. She mouthed one word, "Please." Somewhere deep beneath Zira's floor, the gourd trembled. A single crack appeared on its side, thin as a hair, glowing faintly blue. The thunder spirits had begun to answer. The night Lindau left Nambila, the moon hid behind drifting clouds, as though the heavens themselves wished to conceal her escape. She moved barefoot across the cracked earth, carrying only a woven pouch and a gourd of river dust, a reminder of what the land once was before silence swallowed the rain. Her heart beat in rhythm with the distant rumbles beyond the mountains. The dreams had shown her the path, the mountain of clouds, sacred and forbidden, where the thunder spirits were said to dwell. If she could reach it, perhaps they would hear her again. She walked without words, but the world seemed to answer her silence. The wind brushed gently against her cheeks, swirling around her like a soft hum. Dry grass bent as she passed, whispering in waves that followed her steps. Somewhere in the distance, a hyena howled, not a laugh but a low, mournful sound that echoed through the valley. It made her pause. She touched her throat, the place where her voice used to live, and closed her eyes. "You can still be heard," the wind seemed to say. By dawn, she reached the edges of the great forest that guarded the mountain's base. The trees were tall and hollow-eyed, their bark cracked by years without rain. Yet as she entered, the air grew cooler, damp with a hint of life that hadn't yet given up. Each leaf that brushed against her arm seemed to pulse faintly, as if recognizing something long forgotten. She felt the spirits watching her, not with eyes but through soundless presence, like a hum beneath the ground. When she stumbled from exhaustion, a small bird, its feathers the color of ash and lightning, fluttered down beside her. It tilted its head, studying her, and then began to mimic a melody she had once sung to her mother as a child. The sound pierced her heart. Tears filled her eyes. The bird circled her once, chirping insistently, and then darted ahead down a narrow trail. She followed, understanding the invitation without a word. As she walked, echoes of her own humming filled the air, faint, fractured, yet undeniably hers. The forest was singing with her, or perhaps for her, carrying pieces of her lost voice through the leaves. She touched a trunk and felt it vibrate softly, like a drum remembering its rhythm. A memory rose in her mind, her mother's hand in hers, teaching her the thunder song. When the skies grow quiet, sing not for rain but for truth. The thunder hears only those who are pure of heart. By the time the sun began to sink, painting the forest in copper and gold, she reached a clearing where an ancient stone stood half buried in vines. Symbols of lightning and water were etched into its surface, faintly glowing. Kneeling beside it, Linda traced the carvings with her fingertips. The moment she did, the ground shivered lightly, and from somewhere unseen came a low, rolling echo that made her bones hum. She did not need a voice to answer. Her heart replied in silence. The echo deepened, turning into whispers carried by the air. "Daughter of song," it murmured, "your silence is not your weakness. It is the vessel through which the sky will speak." The voice came from everywhere, the wind, the trees, the trembling earth beneath her feet. Her tears spilled freely as the whispers swirled around her like a storm made of soundless thunder. As night fell, Linda lit a small fire with dry twigs. Shadows of glowing eyes appeared in the dark beyond the flames. Animals gathered silently, antelopes, owls, jackals, and even snakes, all watching her without fear. It was as if the entire forest had come to listen. She picked up a stick and drew the symbol of thunder in the dirt, just as her mother had taught her. The animals bowed their heads, and the wind began to hum the ancient song once more. Then, as the flames flickered blue, a figure emerged from the shadows. Not human, not entirely spirit. It shimmered with the shape of a woman, her body woven from mist and stormlight, her eyes glowing like distant lightning. Linda's breath caught. The figure extended a translucent hand toward her and whispered without sound, "The mountain awaits, child. The echo of your song lives in its heart. Do not be afraid." The spirit touched Linda's forehead, and a vision surged through her, of roaring skies, of rain flooding the plains, of thunder laughing across the horizon. She saw herself standing on the mountain peak, arms outstretched, while her voice, reborn, rose with the storm. When the vision faded, she was alone again, but the feeling of warmth and power lingered in her chest. At dawn, she began the final climb toward the mountain of clouds. The path was steep and rugged, winding through sharp stones and ancient ruins half swallowed by vines. Her feet bled, but she did not stop. With every step, she felt lighter, as though her silence was turning into strength. The mountain responded. Clouds gathered above her, low and heavy, rumbling softly. By the time she reached the ridge, rain misted her face for the first time in years. She lifted her head to the sky, eyes closed, and smiled. She could not speak, but the thunder spoke for her, a low, distant boom that rolled through the heavens like the beating of a colossal drum. The mountain had heard her, and for the first time since her voice was taken, the sky itself began to hum her name. The climb to the mountain's peak was long and merciless. The air grew thick and electric, each breath heavy with the scent of coming rain. Lindao's legs trembled with exhaustion, her palms raw from gripping jagged rocks slick with mist. Yet something inside her, something stronger than fear or pain, kept pushing her upward. Her mother's song echoed faintly in her heart, guiding her step after trembling step. When she finally reached the summit, the world below disappeared into swirling clouds, and the sky loomed close enough to touch. Thunder rolled across the heavens like the growl of an ancient beast awakening. The clouds split, veins of light flashing through their gray bellies. Lindao fell to her knees, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the horizon. A bolt of lightning struck the ground before her, scorching the stone into glass. The light didn't fade, it twisted, took shape. From it rose a towering figure cloaked in storm and flame, his eyes burning like twin suns behind the veil of rain. His voice, when it came, was the sound of the sky itself breaking. "I am Nkosi Waduma," the spirit thundered, his every word shaking the mountain. "Guardian of the skies, keeper of the storm's truth. Who dares call me from my slumber?" Lindao tried to speak, but no sound came. Her lips parted, her throat strained, but only silence answered. She bowed low, trembling beneath the power that radiated from him like heat. Her fingers dug into the wet soil as she tried to gesture, to show her throat, to make him understand. She traced a symbol in the dirt, the same thunder mark that bound her silence. Nkosi's eyes narrowed. The clouds above darkened further, swirling violently as if echoing his anger. "Your song is known to the winds," he rumbled. "Your mother's gift flows through you, child of voice. Yet I hear no melody. Why do you summon me in silence?" Tears streaked down Lindao's face as she pointed to her throat, then to the heavens and finally back toward the village hidden far below. The memory of her stepmother's cruel ritual burned behind her eyes, the way the gourd had glowed, the flash of light, the sudden emptiness where her song had been. She pressed her palm to her chest as if to say, "It was stolen." For a long moment there was only wind. Then the sky cracked open with a roar so powerful it knocked her backward. Lightning split the air again and again, striking the mountain's edges, sending stones tumbling into the valley below. Nkosi's voice boomed over the chaos, filled with fury and grief. "Stolen?" he bellowed. "By mortal hands?" His tone deepened, shaking the clouds. "The voice of thunder does not belong in chains. The one who steals the sky's song curses the land beneath it." Lindao clung to the ground, her hair whipping in the wind, her eyes wide with fear but also awe. The spirit's power filled the air like a heartbeat, pulsing through every drop of rain. He raised one massive hand and lightning crawled across his skin like living veins. "You are not voiceless," he thundered, "for the storm remembers every note that has ever touched the wind. Speak through me, child of rain." He thrust his hand toward her chest and a surge of light engulfed her. For a brief, blinding instant, Lindao felt her voice again, not in her throat but everywhere. The world vibrated with it. The clouds sang, the stones trembled, and the wind echoed her silent cry. Yet just as quickly the light faded, leaving her breathless and still mute. Nkosi's expression softened, sorrow flickering in his eyes. "The one who caged your song still binds it," he said, his tone low and mournful. "Your voice sleeps within the vessel of deceit. You must return to the place of silence, to the home of the thief. Only then can the thunder be whole again." Lindao looked up at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to ask how, to beg him for strength, for guidance, but all she could do was nod. Nkosi extended his hand once more, and a small spark of lightning floated from his palm, settling into Lindao's chest. "The storm will walk with you," he said. "When you cannot speak, it will answer. When you are struck down, it will rise for you. But remember this, child, thunder is not mercy. It is truth made sound." The words echoed like a drumbeat inside her. The storm around them began to churn faster, the wind twisting into a spiral that pulled at her clothes and hair. Nkosi's form began to dissolve, breaking apart into streaks of light. "Go now," his voice called from within the swirling tempest. "Go before the sky drowns the earth." The ground split beneath her feet and the mountain trembled. A blinding flash of white engulfed everything and then, darkness. Lindao felt herself falling, carried by the storm's arms, her body weightless. She could feel the thunder's rhythm pulsing through her veins, urging her onward, down the mountain, back to where her silence began. When her feet finally touched the earth again, the storm broke loose across Nambila. Winds howled through the fields and lightning carved veins of light across the sky. Villagers screamed, rushing for shelter as thunder shattered the air. In the heart of it all, Lindau stood alone at the edge of the plains, her dress torn, her hair wild, her eyes glowing faintly with stormlight. The rain poured in sheets, soaking her to the bone, but she did not move. Behind her, the mountain of clouds groaned like a living thing, and a deep, resonant voice rolled across the sky. The voice of thunder returns. Lindau looked toward her village, toward the house where her stepmother still hid the stolen gourd, and though her lips did not move, the storm roared her promise for all to hear. The time of silence was ending. The storm descended upon Nambila like a beast unleashed from the heavens. Clouds churned above the village, black and swollen, their bellies flashing with veins of blinding light. The air itself quivered, thick with electricity, and the once dry soil trembled beneath the pounding of thunder. The villagers ran for cover, clutching their children and praying to spirits they hadn't spoken to in years. Roofs rattled, flames sputtered, and the scent of wet dust filled the air for the first time in a decade. At the heart of it all, Mama Zira's hut stood trembling. The wind tore at its thatched roof, howling through every crack like a chorus of angry spirits. Zira clutched her chest, eyes darting wildly as the thunder roared closer, as if calling her name. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "It's not real, it's just a storm. Just a storm." But deep inside she knew it wasn't. The thunder had come for her. A sudden flash split the sky, followed by a crack so loud it shook the ground. The door of her hut burst open, flung from its hinges by an unseen force. Rain poured in torrents, flooding the floor as Zira stumbled back, her heart racing. The fire in the hearth hissed and died, plunging the room into darkness. Then another flash illuminated the walls, and there, glowing faintly beneath a woven mat, the outline of the gourd pulsed like a heartbeat. Zira gasped, her voice trembling. "No one can see it. No one must know." She rushed to cover it, but before her hands could touch the mat, lightning struck the earth just outside her door. The blast threw her backward, her head striking the wall. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't alone. Lindau stood at the threshold, drenched in rain and wrapped in the storm's glow. Her eyes shimmered with the reflection of lightning, and though her lips did not move, the thunder spoke for her. Each boom carried her silent fury, each flash her sorrow. The villagers, drawn by the unearthly noise, gathered outside, faces pale and wide-eyed. They saw Zira sprawled on the floor and Lindau standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by white fire. "Spirits forgive us," one elder whispered. "The child of rain has returned." Zira scrambled to her knees, fear contorting her face. "It wasn't me," she cried, pointing a shaking finger toward Lindau. "She bewitched me." She cursed the rain. But the thunder did not agree. It cracked so loud that the walls of the hut split, sending straw and clay scattering. A second bolt struck the center of the room, shattering a wooden stool. The ground opened slightly, and a current of wind lifted the mat that hid her crime. The gourd rolled into view, glowing faintly blue beneath the storm's light. The villagers gasped, murmuring prayers. Zira froze, her breath coming in shallow bursts. "No," she whispered. "It's mine, it's—" Lightning circled her in a ring, tracing a perfect circle of fire around her trembling body. The thunder rumbled in rhythm, a voice too vast to belong to mortals. It demanded truth, not excuses. Zira fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. I wanted peace," she screamed over the roar of the storm. "Her songs made the people love her more than me. I only wanted silence." The ring of lightning tightened. The villagers stepped back in fear as the light around Zira grew brighter, burning without flame. Her confession spilled out of her like a flood she could no longer control. "I took her voice. I sealed it so she'd never sing again. I thought the gods would bless me, but—" Her words broke off into a sob as thunder drowned her voice. Then came the final strike. A bolt of lightning, white as the bones of the sky, shot down from the clouds and struck the gourd. It shattered instantly, fragments scattering like stars. A burst of pure sound exploded from it, a sound so beautiful and fierce that it shook every roof, every heart. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a cry. It was a song, Lindau's song. The melody filled the air, rising with the rain, carrying warmth and forgiveness and power. The storm seemed to pause as if listening. Each drop of rain began to shimmer with light, and the clouds released their full weight, drenching the parched earth. The villagers fell to their knees, sobbing with relief as water soaked the ground, washing away years of dust and despair. Lindau stood still, her hair whipping in the wind, her lips parting for the first time in years. The sound that left her throat was soft but radiant, a hum that resonated with the thunder's rhythm. Her voice had returned, richer than before, echoing with the memory of every storm that had ever been. Zira, weeping, reached out toward her. "Forgive me," she begged. "Please, I was blind with envy. I thought silence would make me safe." Lindau stepped closer, her expression calm, sorrowful. She didn't speak words, but the air around her carried meaning, a whisper of forgiveness wrapped in thunder's echo. The ring of lightning faded, leaving Zira trembling but unharmed, her eyes reflecting regret deeper than rainwater. Then Lindau turned toward the sky and her song grew louder. The clouds responded. Bolts of lightning danced joyfully across the heavens, and rain poured harder, soaking every roof, every road, every soul. For the first time in years the fields began to drink. The riverbeds filled. The wells overflowed. The villagers cried her name, chanting in rhythm with the falling rain, "Lindau, child of the storm. The voice of thunder has returned." And as the final echo faded into the distance, a rainbow broke across the sky, not pale and faint, but vivid, burning like a promise reborn. The drought was over. The curse was broken. The silence that had haunted Nambila was gone. In its place rose the voice of a girl who had sung her truth through the storm. The rain began with a whisper, a trembling ripple across the cracked earth that slowly grew into a symphony of sound. Lindau lifted her face toward the darkened sky, and for the first time in years, cool droplets kissed her skin. Around her, the people of Nambila fell to their knees, hands raised in awe, tears mingling with the rain. They had forgotten what it felt like, the smell of wet soil, the rhythm of thunder rolling like drums of forgiveness, the music of life returning. But as Lindau's voice rose into the storm, they remembered. Her song was unlike anything they had ever heard before. It was not just a melody but a calling, a voice stitched from pain, silence, and defiance. It told the story of drought and deceit, of a girl whose gift was stolen and a land that had suffered for it. The rain responded to every note, pounding harder with each verse, washing away the dust that had clung to roofs and hearts alike. The villagers looked upon her not as a cursed child but as the spirit's chosen, the one who carried the thunder's truth. Zira stumbled out of the shattered remains of her hut, soaked and trembling. Her lips moved but no sound came. She reached for the air as if begging it to return what she had taken, but the storm had judged her already. The thunder boomed once more, sealing her fate. She was not dead. No, death would have been mercy. Instead, her tongue was stilled by the very force she had defied. Her punishment was silence, a mirror of what she had inflicted upon her stepdaughter. Lindau turned toward her but did not gloat. Her song softened, a melody of forgiveness that filled the air with warmth even as the wind howled. The villagers, soaked to their bones, bowed their heads. Some wept openly, ashamed of how easily they had believed the stepmother's lies, of how they had let fear blind them to truth. The elders raised their staffs and declared that from that day forth, no child's voice would ever be silenced in Nambila, for a voice could carry blessings, and to steal it was to offend the heavens. The rain continued through the night, flooding the fields that had long lain barren. Rivers that had dried into cracks now overflowed, carrying life back to the land. Fish returned to streams, frogs croaked from every corner. Children splashed in puddles while old men laughed like boys again. The air was thick with renewal. The storm had not come to destroy but to heal. As dawn approached, the rain slowed to a gentle drizzle. The clouds parted, revealing a sunrise so vivid it painted the sky in gold and violet. Lindau stood at the center of the village, her voice now calm and low, humming the ancient song her mother had taught her. The sound carried far, over the hills and valleys, into the rivers and trees, reminding every living thing that the thunder had not abandoned them. It had simply waited for truth to be spoken again. Zira, mute and broken, watched from a distance. Though her heart burned with regret, no words could escape her. And perhaps that was how it was meant to be, for silence too can teach. The villagers pitied her but did not approach. They left her to live in the echo of what she had done, forever listening to the songs of the one she tried to destroy. Years later, the people of Nambila still told the story of that night. They said that when the rain first falls each season, if you listen closely, you can hear a second voice in the thunder, deep, fierce, and kind. It calls Lindau's name, answering her melody, just as Nkosi Waduma had promised. And the children, playing in the fields under warm showers, sing her song without fear, their laughter rising like a new kind of prayer. Lindau became a guardian of the rains, known across the lands as she who sings for the skies. The villagers built a shrine near the river where she once sang alone, and every year on the anniversary of the storm, they gather to honor her courage. They bring gourds filled with water, not to trap voices but to pour them freely into the earth, symbols of truth, renewal, and remembrance. For in Nambila the rains never stopped again. And as thunder rolled gently in the distance, it carried not a warning but a promise, that every silenced soul will one day find its song.